In this example, same direction, solve for x. The equation is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where a, b, and c are constants. So we're going to solve this guy generically. In other words, if we solve this guy by completing the square, we've solved every single possible equation you can think of, because a, b, and c can be whatever you want them to be. For any particular problem, though, they have to be the constants, right? So we're going to solve by taking, well, eventually we're going to take roots. We're going to solve by completing the square so that we can take roots. So I'm going to take ax squared plus bx plus c, and I'm going to isolate the constant because that's the first step. So you get ax squared plus bx equals what? If you get the c to the other side, what would you have to do? You'd subtract c from both sides. 0 minus c is just negative c. Okay, that was step 1. Isolate the constant, which is just c in this case. Step 2 is divide through by the leading coefficient. What's the leading coefficient represented by? A. So we're going to divide through by a, which means you divide everything by a. And then what does that get you? The best way to write it is x squared plus, okay, you don't want to write it bx over a. You want to get the coefficient out in front, so what would the coefficient be? It would be the b over a. So you would rewrite bx over a as b divided by a times x. That's the same thing. Leave space, equals negative c over a. So we're doing the same thing we did before. Don't let the letters scare you. They represent numbers, so you're doing the same thing you did before, the same steps. The next step is the step where you complete the square on the left side. So remember what you do. You take 1/2 the coefficient, little scratch work over here. You take 1/2 the coefficient of x. What's the coefficient of x? B over a. How do you take 1/2 of a number? You multiply it by 1/2. How do you multiply fractions? You multiply straight across. So 1 times b is b on top, and then 2 times a on the bottom, 2a. Write that number down. Since it's a plus here, you make it a plus b over 2a. Today I didn't have any examples with a minus here, but if it were a minus here, you would put a minus in front of that half the coefficient of the x. You would put a minus in front of it. You'll see an example of that tomorrow. Okay, now what do you do with the b over 2a? To complete the square, what do you do? You square it. So what do you get when you square b over 2a? B squared over
4a squared.
4a squared. You square the numerator, you square the denominator. B squared on top, 2a times 2a is 4a squared on the bottom. So we end up adding to both sides b squared over 4a squared. Don't let the letters scare you. We're doing the same exact thing we did in the last problem. Okay? Now, what is the left-hand side factor to be? If you do it right, there's no thought involved in this. Almost no thought. It's going to be some quantity squared. What is it going to be? X, good. X plus b over 2a, which you already wrote down, quantity squared. Equals, okay, little bit of scratch work here. I'll do it quickly because we're running out of time. I need a common denominator on the right side here, just like in the last problem. The common denominator will be 4a squared. So what do I multiply the negative c over a by to get 4a squared? Well, I need a 4 and I need an a. I already have a factor of a, so top and bottom. Okay? Which gives you, on top, you could think of it, if you do the multiplication, you could think of it as a negative 4ac over 4a squared. And then you still have the plus b squared over 4a squared. Okay, I'm going to rewrite that right-hand side as a single fraction. And I'm going to reverse the addition. So the denominator will be the common denominator, 4a squared. The numerator I'm going to write, I could write it as negative 4ac plus b squared. But that's the same as b squared minus 4ac. So on the right side, I know it's a mess, but on the right side, we get b squared minus 4ac over 4a squared. On the left side, we have x plus actually, divided by 2a quantity squared. We're almost done. Give me 20 seconds, 30 seconds. What do we do at this point? We solve by taking square roots. And what do you need to remember in front of the square root on the right side? Plus or minus. Left side, we get x plus b over 2a. The exponent of 2 disappears. The right side, if we split up the square root, what's the square root of 4a squared on the bottom there? 2a. On top, the square root does not split up over a minus sign. You just have to leave it as the square root of b squared minus 4ac. Finally, to solve for x, we're going to subtract the b over 2a from both sides. And you get x is equal to negative b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. But this combines into a single fraction because you have a common denominator. Just combine the numerators over that 2a, and you get x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now I'm out of time, but this is a really important formula. It's called the quadratic formula. These days, teachers don't derive it like they should. Now you know where how you get it. And you get it the same way you solve those other problems. You get it by completing the square. This is the quadratic formula, the second most important formula we talk about in this class. We'll talk about it more tomorrow. Thanks for sticking around, guys.